I declare war. This video is in response to David Carroll and Hypocrisy 100. They posted a series of videos dealing with swirling, and in those videos they took pot shots at me. Um, in fact, they used my moniker, I declare war, in a couple of their videos. So this is my response. First of all, both of these guys claim that they are not concerned about black women's personal preference. That's what David Carroll has said, and that's what Hypocrisy 100 has implied. In fact, he basically says that those women who want to swirl, bye. That's the word that he used with respect to those women. He's basically saying good riddance. But my point is this. You can't claim to be unconcerned or disinterested when you have posted video after video after video on this subject. In fact, Hypocrisy 100 posted a 53-minute long video on this subject. What kind of person devotes that kind of time to a subject that does not matter to them? Obviously, the subject matters to them. So they need to quit fronting. They need to quit pretending. They need to quit being disingenuous and be true and be honest. Because if they're honest with themselves, they would admit that this issue matters to them. Because again, if something doesn't matter, why even waste time doing videos on the subject? I mean, I don't talk about subjects that don't matter to me. I only talk about subjects that are of some importance to me. And this subject is very important. The other point that I want to raise is this. Both of these guys are hypocrites. David Carroll starts off by talking about how we're using shaming tactics when we call people like Karazin a bed wench. He is the last person that needs to be criticizing for someone for using quote unquote shaming tactics. That is all that this man does, is use shaming tactics. He constantly insults people who disagree with him. He calls them shines. He calls them savages. He calls them monkeys. He calls them apes. He talks about how they don't know how to connect the dots. He questions their intelligence simply because they have a difference of opinion. And this man has the audacity to criticize people for using shaming tactics. This applies to both of these guys. Both of them have a double standard when it comes to black women. And before I go into detail about that, I just want to touch on another example of double standards. I watched the Advice Show's interview with Christelyn, Karazin, and in the comment section to that video, I noticed that some of the people acknowledged that they were in interracial relationships. And these were African American men acknowledging that they were in interracial relationships. And these same men had the audacity to question Christelyn Karazin, to basically go after her or to attack her position when these guys are engaging in the same activity. In fact, the host of the show, from what I understand, is involved in an interracial marriage. He's married to a non-black woman. These people who are in these interracial relationships, they have forfeited their right to speak out against people like Christelyn Karazin because they are doing the exact same thing. That's like a preacher preaching to the congregation about adultery. about how wrong adultery is, but yet that same preacher is committing adultery. Or a preacher speaking out against homosexuality, and that same preacher is engaged in homosexuality. These people, these black men who are involved in these interracial relationships, they don't have any right whatsoever to criticize Christelyn Karazin for engaging in the same type of activity. They have forfeited their right. And there's no bigger or better example of such hypocrisy than David Carroll. This is a man who has the nerve to criticize black women for swirling when this man, this hypocrite, has encouraged black men to swirl. And for those of you who don't believe me, for those of you who are unfamiliar with his content, I will post a link to a video in which this man talks about how white women are better than black women. In that video, this man encourages black men who are interested in getting married. He encourages those black men to marry white women or other non-black women.
Yeah. So if you're going to go that marriage route, you better get you a woman outside of your race. You better get you a white woman or some other ethnicity, because if you are foolish enough to put a ring on this nappy-headed black woman's finger, I'm telling you, one night you're going to be laying in bed with her and she's going to be asleep. And you're going to be laying there and you're going to be listening to her snarling and snoring like the beast she is. And you're going to remember this video and you're going to say, that brother tried to warn me and I didn't heed his warning.
And this is the same hypocrite who has the nerve to criticize a black woman for advocating the same thing. He's not in any moral position to criticize anyone on that issue. He can't criticize anyone on that issue because he's engaging in the same conduct. He is doing exactly what he's criticizing these black women for doing. And while I'm talking about hypocrites, you have this guy Equacy 100 criticizing black women for disrespecting black men. He has the nerve to do this when all this man does is not only disrespect black men, this man bashes black women constantly. You can't get through a video of his without hearing him refer to a black woman as a hoe, as a bimbo, as a bitch, and other derogatory misogynistic terms. See, people like this are part of the reason why black women swirl. When they have black men who use abusive, misogynistic language, when they have black men abandoning the black woman to be with white women, often black women decide to date interracially. Now I'm going to move on to this other point. In all his videos, well, a couple of his videos, he basically talks about how black men are embarrassing him because they're not speaking out strong enough on this issue of swirling. They're not making strong arguments. And he says that we're basically arguing about the wrong point. And this is the point that he makes. He implies that black women swirl due to black male dysfunction. He claims that black women, and this is his core point, he says that black women cannot complain about black male dysfunction when black women benefited from it, tolerated it, and they were co-conspirators in it. And then he cites the example of a drug dealer. He cites the example of a black woman staying with a drug dealer, reaping the benefits of this drug dealer's illegal activity by going shopping and, getting the finer things as a result of this man engaging in this illegal activity. So that's part of the core point that he raises in his videos on this issue. He says all those other issues about preference and racism and white supremacy are irrelevant, and that this issue that I just stated is the core issue. And I'm going to tell you why that's faulty. And later on, I will talk about how racism is the core issue, how preference is a core issue. So this argument is weak for a couple of reasons. The first reason is this: it relies on generalizations. Black women who are the target group for this whole swirling movement, they aren't the kind of women that are dating the drug dealer. They're not the kind of women that have multiple children by multiple different men. Most of these women that are being targeted for this whole swirl movement are middle class, educated black women who don't have multiple children and multiple baby fathers and all that stuff. Often they're single, educated black women that are looking for a husband or a serious relationship. And that's my understanding from the videos that I've seen of Christelyn, Karazin, and just based on some of the readings that I have read, some of the writings that I've read on this subject. That's the target demographic. So all these stereotypes that this David Carroll is relying on, they don't really apply. And they are really, in the big scheme of things, irrelevant. Also, this is the second point that I want to raise on this issue. Just because someone was involved in a dysfunctional relationship with a black man at one point in their life, it doesn't mean that they have to engage in dysfunctional activity for the rest of their life. They can decide to make a change. And I don't think that swirling is the way to make that change. But the core point is this: they can make that change. And there's nothing wrong with that. So this suggestion that because they participated in some dysfunctional behaviors at one point means that they can't move beyond that and advance in life, that's ridiculous. Now, as I said before, David Carroll basically stated that racism is not the issue, that personal preference is not the issue. Again, if personal preference didn't matter, why even create the videos? Why even create video after video after video on the subject if personal preference was irrelevant? Because this is all about personal preference. It's about a woman deciding that she wants to date outside of her race. It's about a woman deciding that she's going to make an industry out of this black woman's misery by encouraging her to date outside of her race. That's the core issue. That's part of what the problem is. So to ignore that and pretend like this has nothing to do with that is silly, because that's the core issue at hand. Because if personal preference doesn't matter, why even talk about it at all? Also, racism is a core issue, and that ties into this personal preference as well. When a people want to conquer another people, the first thing that they do is they kill off the man. And after they kill the man off, or destroy the man, or neutralize the man, they take the women and the children. And that's basically what has happened in the black community. One of the core issues that the swirl movement talks about is the lack of marriageable, quote unquote, marriageable black men. That's their core issue. In order to understand that issue, you have to understand institutionalized and structural racism in this country. It is institutionalized racism that has created the problem of mass incarceration in the Black community. The whole war on drugs has essentially turned into a war on Black people, resulting in high incarceration rates. When you have thousands upon thousands of Black men locked up behind bars for nonviolent offenses, that limits the dating pool for Black women. That limits the opportunity for Black families. When you look at the educational disparities, that's a result of failing schools, the achievement gap, the school to prison pipeline. When you look at those problems, you understand why there is a lack of quote unquote marriageable Black men. Often educated Black women who are career oriented, they are less likely to marry a man who doesn't have the same level of education. And that's a whole nother issue. And that goes into the issue of employment opportunities. There was a time when you didn't need to have a college education in order to have a good, strong job, a job that would enable you to provide for your family and to protect your family. But those days are gone with the decimation of the manufacturing industry. When you look at all the plants that have left areas like Detroit and other urban areas, you have less opportunity for legitimate employment, less opportunity to provide for a family, and thereby creating a situation where there are less marriageable Black men. Also, you have the issue of violence, all the violence that takes place in urban areas where young people are snuffed out before they even get a chance to develop a family. All of these problems contribute to the lack of marriageable Black men. And that problem of lack of marriageable Black men is one of the core driving engines behind this so-called swirling movement. Instead of just moving on based on the fact that there are less Black marriageable men, our community needs to be about rebuilding the Black man and the Black woman so that we can have more marriageable Black men and more marriageable Black women. But that's a whole nother subject. Racism is important also because of self-hatred. And before I go any further, I don't expect somebody like David Carroll to understand this. Because this is a man whose YouTube career is based upon defending white supremacy. Anytime a Black man or boy or girl or woman is killed by these police, here comes Captain Save a Racist David Carroll defending that racist. Anytime someone spews hateful racist rhetoric, a white person does this, David Carroll defends that white person. He defends them. He's a defender of white supremacy. So of course I expect him to say that white supremacy is not an issue. Of course I expect him to say that. White supremacy is an issue, whether he wants to ignore it or not. White supremacy and racism taught us to idolize whiteness, to view whiteness as the standard of beauty, as the standard of everything. And that's why children, even at the age of 5 and younger, they've been programmed already to hate being Black. We've seen the tests where they present 2 dolls to children. One is white and one is black. They ask the children to pick out the beautiful doll, and they point to the white doll. They ask the children to pick out the ugly doll, and they point to the black doll, because they've been indoctrinated early on. And that affects our relationships. It does. When you see the white woman as the standard of beauty, you will try to do everything that you can to obtain that white woman. That's why you see these successful people, these successful black men. They are with white women often, or very light women. Too often that's the case, because they've been programmed to worship whiteness. They've been programmed to. And our sisters have been programmed to as well. That's why you will see them trying to look like white women. That's why you'll see it. And that has to be the primary explanation behind this whole swirling thing, in part. Because when you think about it, I already told you all about how a people are conquered. Nowadays, unfortunately, some black women participate in the emasculation of the black man by abandoning the black man and running into the arms of their former slave master. And black men degrade their black woman by chasing these white women like dogs, chasing them and protecting them, much like King Kong protected that white woman in the movie. So racism is a big part of this. Self-hatred is a big part of this. We were taught to hate our features, to hate who we are. And I mentioned this in another video, but we are all familiar with the grotesque black images that we were been bombarded with. Those images of the mammies and the minstrels, the sambos, with the black skin and the knotty hair, the wide, huge red lips and bulging white eyes. We're familiar with those images. We're familiar with the image of the African as a cannibalistic savage running around in a jungle with no clothes on. We are familiar with those images. Those images taught us to hate ourselves so much that we internalize self-hatred and racism against our own black selves to such a degree that we discriminate against our own brothers and sisters based on the complexion of their skin, where we call each other crispy and black, where we talk about our natural features, our hair. We call it nappy if it resembles African hair. If it resembles European hair, it's quote unquote good hair. So you can't tell me that hair doesn't matter. The hair is not a part of the issue. This man pretended like the only thing that black men focus on is the size of a black woman's behind. Of course, many of us are attracted to that feature, but that's not the sole feature. There are many features of the woman that is beautiful. There are many aspects of women that attract us. And when our minds have been messed up and destroyed by white supremacy too often, many of us are attracted by European images. That's why we got to free our minds from this mental bondage. But there are a lot of us that love the black woman, that respect the black woman. And when you look at the numbers, when you look at the fact that 75% of black men marry black women, that tells you that the majority of black men do love black women, do appreciate the black woman. The fact that you have 25% who date interracially, even though that's a minority, it is a significant minority. And that's something that really needs to be addressed. But I won't focus solely on that in this video. But that is an issue that must be addressed. So in one of David Carroll's videos, he cites the example of a magazine. One magazine, I think it's called Black Men. It's a black man's magazine that features models, scantily clad models. And he uses the fact that that magazine has a few issues that featured non-black women on it. That featured white women, Asian women, Latino women. And he used that magazine, that single magazine, to reach a generalization, which is a logical fallacy. Based on one magazine, he generalizes about how black men love white women as a whole. And I've already given you the statistic about the 75% of black men who marry black women. You can't make a generalization about a whole race of men based on one magazine. One magazine couldn't possibly reflect the mentality of all black men or most black men. And that's what he suggested, that it was most black men who love white women. And again, he's the last person that needs to be talking about that. And I think that the only reason he raised this issue is primarily because he's in a position where he has talked about how white women are better than black women. He's done that. So he knows that he couldn't possibly raise the issue of preference when he has expressed a preference for white women. So this is a man, is the last person that needs to be criticizing anyone for having a preference for white women or white men. Next, I want to just conclude by talking about something that Akwesi 100 raised in his video. He talked about Islam and about Muslim households. And the reason why he brought this up is because a while back we had a debate, and he was basically saying that there's something wrong with black women being in leadership positions. The issue was about Baltimore and the fact that Baltimore has a black woman mayor and a black woman prosecutor. And in one of my previous videos, I saluted those women for their courage and for the things that they had done. In particular, I show respect for Marilyn Mosby. She's the prosecutor here in Baltimore. I show respect for her because she had the courage to bring charges against those officers who were responsible for the death of Freddie Gray, a young black man That took courage because you have so many cowardly prosecutors that don't have the heart to bring charges against police who brutalize our people. So I saluted that woman. And I saluted the mayor of this city for having the courage to encourage the Department of Justice to conduct an investigation of the Baltimore Police Department. So because I spoke highly of these women, this clown, Akwesi 100, basically suggested that that was a sign of weakness. It's a sign of weakness that a black man would salute black women leaders or accept a black woman leader. And I said that that was ridiculous and that it reflected a caveman mentality. So then he comes back basically saying, well, how could I say that if I'm a Muslim? And then he cites these examples of how Muslim men interact with their women. And I'll just say this. Your statements about your observations dealing with Muslim families, those statements and those assessments are relatively accurate. I don't dispute what you're saying. Devout Muslims believe in self respect, they believe in modesty, and they believe in righteousness. So I don't dispute that aspect of what you said. But I do dispute your suggestion that women can't lead. Because in the Muslim world, throughout history and even the modern times, there are plenty of examples of Muslim women leaders. You have examples in Pakistan, Indonesia, Turkey, Bangladesh, even places like Iran and Mali in West Africa. And I will provide a link to an article on Wikipedia that points this out so that you can read it for yourself. So the notion that women can't lead is silly, is juvenile, and is medieval. These are modern times, and in a modern era, there's room for men and women to lead society. So those are some of my thoughts. And before I go, I just want to say this last point. No one is begging women to accept a black man. I'm simply saying that that's what women should do. It should be black love and black unity if we are to have black power and black excellence as a black nation. Peace.